through to Council Bluffs, Brigham Young spoke in this wise in the hearing of hundreds. He said it was time for men who were walking in other men's shoes to step out of them. "Brother Jacobs," he says, "the woman you claim for a wife does not belong to you. She is the spiritual wife of Brother Joseph, sealed up to him. I am his proxy, and she in this behalf with her children are my property. You can go where you please and get another, but be sure to get one of your own kindred spirit." The immediate problem with such a statement is that there is no contemporary corroboration for it. Hall states that Brigham's statement was made in the hearing of hundreds of people, yet there are no other diaries that indicate such a statement, or indeed any statement from Brigham to Henry. The statement itself would need to have been made sometime between Henry's arrival at Mount Pisgah on May 18th and his departure on his mission approximately June 1st. For instance, Patty Bartlett Sessions, who was a detailed journal writer, arrived at Mount Pisgah in the same company as the Jacobses and left Mount Pisgah on June 2nd, 1846. None of her diary entries for the period refer to any such statement by Brigham Young, and it's safe to assume that she would have been among the hundreds referenced by William Hall. In fact, Sessions continues to refer to Zina as either Zina Jacobs or as Sister Jacobs as late as June 3rd, 1847, which reference would seem unlikely if she had heard Brigham claim Zina and her children as his property in exile Henry. The diary of William Huntington, Zina's father, records only one semi-public and one fully public meeting between May 18th and the 1st of June. There was a prayer meeting for selected individuals held on May 31st and a meeting in the Grove near Huntington's house on June 1st that turned into a special conference at which considerable business was done. There is, however, no record in his diary of any denouncing of his son-in-law by Brigham. Is it reasonable to conclude that Brigham Young made the statement attributed to him by William Hall? Without corroboration, accepting such a statement made by a disaffected member in a polemical and typically hyperbolic anti-Mormon book is questionable. The source that modern authors often use for their corroboration is the following from T.B.H. Stenhouse in his history, The Rocky Mountain Saints. On the banks of the Missouri River, in an Indian country where redress was impossible had it ever been desired, Brigham called upon the husband and told him that his domestic relations in that quarter were at an end, that he must not again be husband to his wife. She whom he idolized, who had been to him the partner of his joys and cares, who had borne to him his children, and who had filled his soul with the hope of a happy future, was to be accounted his no more. The elder was cavalierly informed that he could take another wife, and soon after that he was sent on a preaching mission to England, where he could assuage his grief by a second experience of connubial bliss. Unmentioned by those who use this source for corroboration is that it is impossible that Stenhouse heard the discussion he mentions. Stenhouse was baptized in England on July 14, 1845, and didn't come to the United States until late 1855. He and his wife then served in the eastern United States for the next 3.5 years. They finally immigrated to Utah in 1859, over a dozen years after the statement by Brigham Young was supposedly uttered. Why then would Stenhouse write such a thing in a book claiming to be a history of the saints? The Rocky Mountain Saints, published 3 years after Stenhouse apostatized from the church, was history written with a purpose, to reflect the Godbeite heresy embraced by Stenhouse. Since the Godbeites considered their spiritualist refashioning of Mormonism to be a return to the faith's original roots, the book's portrayal of Joseph Smith was sympathetic, but the portrayal of Brigham Young was anything but flattering, showing him as defiled by his frenzied lust of power and his love of wealth, and that he had been corrupted by his faith. It is an ironic side note to Zina's story that only after Stenhouse sought to take a third polygamous wife did his first wife, Fanny, rebel and denounce the church. After the target of his amorous advances rejected him and married another, Stenhouse became allied with the Godbeites, joined Fanny in apostasy, and wrote his book. Who was this intended third wife? None other than Zina Percinda Young, daughter of Zina Diantha and Brigham Young. Because Stenhouse could not have heard the comments purportedly made by Brigham Young in Mount Pisgah in 1846, it is more likely that he borrowed his account from William Hall's Abominations of Mormonism, written over 2 decades earlier. In other words, Stenhouse borrowed Hall's words as his own, as one more brushstroke in his Godbeite caricature of Brigham Young. Stenhouse's telling cannot be considered corroboration, but simply recast repetition in the same vein as Brodie, Van Wagner, and others who followed the same misleading track. Shortly after the arrival of the first saints in Mount Pisgah, Brigham Young proceeded to call several brethren on missions. On May 23rd, Zina's brother Oliver B. Huntington was called even though he had been in New York since the previous fall. A few days later, on May 31st, Henry was also called on a mission to England along with Lorenzo D. Butler. Henry was apparently given Oliver's mission papers at the same time that he received his own. Henry left in short order, probably in a day or two. Patty Bartlett Sessions reports in her diary that on June 1st, 1846, she sent a letter by Henry Jacobs, which would have been as he was leaving Mount Pisgah. Despite Henry's ability to carry a letter for a fellow pioneer, many authors report that he was almost deathly ill as he left for his mission. Todd Compton recounts the report of an earlier writer who said that Henry was called on a mission to Europe and responded, although so weak from hardship and exposures that it was necessary to carry him to the missionary wagon in a blanket. This story has changed over the years into a form most often heard today. Henry was so ill that it was necessary to put him on a quilt or blanket and transport him to the river so he could catch a boat to England. Both versions are rooted in myth more than in fact. An immediate problem for the latter telling is that while Mount Pisgah is near the middle fork of the Grand River, this waterway is not navigable by passenger boats. Remember that the saints came overland to Mount Pisgah. They didn't come by boat. Thus, while Henry could have been placed on a quilt or blanket and taken to the river, there would have been no boat on that river capable of taking him to England. But even the earlier telling has problems, for historical records show that Henry met incoming immigrants as he was returning on the trail from Mount Pisgah toward Nauvoo on the first leg of his mission. Mary Haskin Parker Richards mentions meeting Henry and another England-bound missionary on the trail approximately 50 miles east of Mount Pisgah on June 6, 1846. That Henry suffered from poor health while on his way to his mission is not in question. What is pure fabrication is the folklore latched onto by some critics that a seriously ill Henry, incapable of standing up to Brigham Young, was hurried out of camp so that Brigham could take Zina to wife. Instead, Henry accepted his mission call and left under his own power. Once Henry left for his mission, Zina and her children moved into the home of her father, William Huntington. It was at this time that Zina later recounted that she had parted with my husband and was then alone with my father to look after me until I should get to winter quarters. The record is also clear that Brigham Young wanted William Huntington to bring his family to Council Bluffs. That such a family would now include Zina, who lived with William, is implicit. William records the letter and a request from Brigham in his diary on July 2, 1846, but he decided to stay at Mount Pisgah based on subsequent counsel by Brother Pratt. A short time later, many in the camp succumbed to illness, with estimates of approximately 150 people dying during the first 6 months of that settlement. Leadership was not immune to disease and death, with William Huntington falling ill on August 9, 1846, and dying only 10 days later on August 19th. Zina was left alone, a single mother of 2 children under 5 years old without aid or assistance. All of her family was gone. Henry was on a mission with Oliver. Her father was dead. Dimmick with his family were en route to Mexico with the Mormon battalion, and her siblings Priscinda, William, and John were in winter quarters. Alone, Zina took up residence with others in the community. Her stepsister, Emily Dow Partridge Young, also a plural wife to both Joseph and Brigham, wrote to Brigham that Zina is well and is living with Sister Boss. In the same letter, she adds, "Zina sends her love to you." It is curious that Zina would express her love to Brigham through her stepsister if she considered the concept of a spousal relationship with him to be foreign or entirely new to her thought. Zina also corresponded with her brother Oliver about her intentions to go to winter quarters. Shortly after the death of their father, Zina wrote a letter to Oliver that he received on December 19, 1846. Oliver recounted in his diary entry for that day some of the things that Zina told him. He mentioned the death of his father, and he commented on Zina's plans. My sister stated that she was at a place called Mount Pisgah where my father died. Zina expected to winter that winter at a place on the Missouri River about 100 miles west of the Mount Pisgah where my brother William, John, and sister Priscinda were, and also the main body of the church was there. Fulfilling